Welcome to this plenary session addressing the triple crisis, climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. And I am Jonathan Patz. I'm a professor at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, but I'm also on the executive board of CUGH and on the research committee as well. And this plenary really, it dovetails off of some plenaries from yesterday and earlier today. And in other CUGH plenary sessions, I kept hearing about today's polycrisis. Yesterday, the talk was about pandemics, climate change, and inequities. And this plenary on the triple crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution can be thought of under an umbrella term or terms: One Health and or planetary health. And I confess right from the start that I'm always against either or decisions. And over the years, I've been asked, what's the difference between One Health and planetary health? To which my answer has been, please stop asking me, because there's really not much, if any, difference. But I want to provide a better answer, written by a risen star and leader in planetary health, Dr. Carlos Ferran Guzman. And he speaks of One Health, eco-health, and planetary health, all as having the same genetic makeup. But these overlapping movements differ only slightly in their phenotypic expression. So now you need not be confused any longer, or at least realize that it's a question not worth asking anymore, please. We have an incredible lineup today. The panel for today's plenary, and you all have their bios in on the CUGH website. So I'm only going to do very quick introductions right now. And I'm going to introduce them in the order of their presentations, which is different from what you see in the printed program. First up is Dr. Catherine Machalaba, who is a principal scientist at EcoHealth Alliance. She holds a PhD in environmental and planetary health sciences and is a member of the One Health high-level expert panel, as well as holding leadership roles in the International Union for the Conservation of Nature and American Public Health Association. Next up is Matthew Carvalho. Did I get that right? Say it. How do you say it? Carvalho, thank you, who's a research fellow for the O'Neill Institute at Georgetown University, specializing in planetary health law and diplomacy, working on the pandemic preparedness instrument, and also on marine biodiversity, a law that just got passed last week, in fact. He was just awarded an inaugural policy fellow for the Planetary Health Alliance based up at Harvard. And as of Wednesday is a Fulbright scholar. Congratulations on that. Dr. Sharon Deem. Boy, I should have you guys stand up and turn around. Okay. Yeah, because you're not up here. That's all right. Faux pas, sorry. Anyway, Dr. Sharon Deem, nationally recognized One Health leader, is a wildlife veterinarian and epidemiologist. She's the director of the St. Louis Zoo Institute for Conservation Medicine, and she teaches a course, One Health, linking the health of animals, humans, animals, and the environment at Washington University in St. Louis. Then we have our international agency speakers. Pushpam Kumar is Senior Economic Advisor for the UN Environment Program, UNEP. He was Chief of the Ecosystem Services Economics Unit and Coordinator for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, and has led the Natural Capital flagship project, Vantage, Valuation and Accounting of Natural Capital for the green economy, among other key environmental projects and reports for UNEP. And our final speaker is Dr. Tamer Rabi, who is lead health specialist for the World Bank's project, Health, Nutrition, and Population Global Practice. Since joining the World Bank in 2005, he's led lending as well as advisory services for over 25 countries. And in 2019, he established and now leads the Health, Climate, and Environment program in the World Bank with the aim of integrating environmental health and climate-smart healthcare measures into World Bank operations. So, this is a star-studded panel. And we begin we'll have very brief presentations, 8 to 10 minute presentations, followed by some Q&A from me, and then Q&A from the audience. So with that, I ask Catherine to please start us off.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be with you all today. Thank you for coming to this session, and thank you, Dr. Patz and Dr. Martin, for your leadership on this topic. This is such a crucial topic. I'm really inspired to see climate change, biodiversity, loss, and pollution really being addressed together. These are triple planetary threats that, of course, affect our health in numerous ways, both acutely and long-term. And so we have to be really looking at this issue a lot, and I am looking forward to discussing over the next 2 days too about what we can do to further work on this topic together. I'm not great at technology, so hopefully I can get this to work, but it probably will. Oh. Okay. I want to just start out on a positive note. So the benefits that we really receive every day from nature, ecosystem services, and I was reminded that Dr. Patz was involved in this work about 20 years ago, actually. So we're not really starting from scratch. We have a foundation of evidence, of a knowledge base, and a lot of good efforts that have already been done to really show the positive value of nature. And there are economic benefits of that. There are health benefits. Really, the underpinnings of our daily lives that come from nature. Of course, with the very large-scale changes to our ecosystem, there are really severe detrimental impacts to our economies, our health, and society in general. So as we change our ecosystems, often without really adequate land use planning, without considering the costs and the benefits adequately, we are in a really dangerous place that we're headed. Now, if we think about the solutions, so I love the description about the different terminologies. I love all of the different terms. I really think whatever we find inspiration in, whether it's a One Health approach or a planetary health approach or environmental health or other integrated approaches, conservation medicine, that's great because it empowers us to lead and to work on it and have it resonate in our professional communities. So don't worry too much about one topic. I'll just use the One Health definition here because I am a member of the One Health high-level expert panel that was formed to advise the quadripartite, which is a collaboration between the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Agency of the UN UN Environment Program, the World Health Organization, and the World Organization for Animal Health, or WOA. I think this is a exciting time to have this quadripartite. It's a new mechanism, and it really signals that there is global commitment to working together on these very challenging and urgent issues. This inclusive definition was endorsed by the 4 agencies in December of 2021, so it's relatively recent. I think what's important about it is that it creates this harmonized understanding of the needs, of the challenges, and the benefits of using an integrated approach. And really at the core of it, this visual, I know it's a bit small, but these tools, communication, collaboration, coordination, and capacity strengthening. So these tools that we already have that we need to invest much more in, the great things that everyone in this room is doing, really we need to be building in a One Health approach and making sure that gains, for example, in the human health sector, which we'll hear really crucially from our colleague from the World Bank in terms of climate smart healthcare, that these are also then transferring to other sectors like veterinary medicine, and I know there's a lot of existing thinking on that, so just to reinforce the efforts that you're already doing that are so important. And with this definition, so we also included these underlying principles for One Health, and I think that they are core to everything that is being discussed in this conference. So looking at equity between sectors and disciplines, socio-political parity, socio-ecological equilibrium, and stewardship for our environment, sustainability, animal welfare, and then really this transdisciplinarity, multi-sectoral collaboration, ensuring that traditional knowledge forms are included. So I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to balancing trade-offs and co-benefits, different priorities, different needs, and then really the responsibility we have to our populations and our planet as a whole. So I just keep these in mind, these principles, as we work with these approaches and try to optimize the delivery of these approaches. I just want to come back to the evidence base here, because there is a lot of evidence that is already existing. There are some outstanding questions in terms of impacts, in terms of relationships between environmental change and health, and also environmental protection and health benefits and economy. We'll hear much more about that from my amazing co-panelists. But just to show some good news too, in terms of the connections between science, policy, and then ultimately practice. So we know that the bad news is that we're on a very severe track. 1 million plant and animal species are currently threatened by extinction. Climate change is happening very rapidly. The effects of climate change, all of these key challenges. Pollution is really at a critical interface with these other challenges too. But the good news is we are making some global commitments that really matter. And I think, this connection of you need the evidence base to show what the issues are, and then really where we need to go and what we need to prioritize. We need the political will to get the policymakers on board to make ambitious commitments, to have the financing come along with that, and the momentum and that global collaboration, regional collaboration, multi-sectoral collaboration. And then we need to be able to actually achieve it. It has to be implementable. So these three components, and I think a lot is happening, and we really need all of it, and we need more of it, and we need implementation. But you see here the evidence base, the ambitious policies, and then guidance mechanisms that are coming along. So contribute to these actively, please, and make them better and help their achievement. Just to highlight some of the very practical gaps that we face when we look at issues like disease emergence and connection to wildlife. And when I look at this here, this is specifically a report that we did with the World Bank that was on disease risk from wildlife to humans, emerging infectious diseases. But the components that are mentioned are actually things that would also help to prevent disease risks to wildlife from humans and domestic animals and agricultural systems. So they're very practical at the end of the day. If you work in the government, you may already be working on components like national One Health coordination platforms, making sure there are surveillance systems in place, access to screening, access to official protocols. So if you are going to do something like a species reintroduction, for conservation, are you considering disease risk in that process? Many other things that we can be doing that just simply are not being done and can be invested in and really can be quite effective. And then I just want to highlight some examples from the ground to show different contexts, specifically from Liberia, about what is being done and how it can be built on and hopefully adapted, upscaled, just hopefully for inspiration from a planetary health and One Health approach. So here you see on the screen a group of amazing Liberian scientists. They are doing outreach with this Living Safely with Bats book. And this is really a visual communication tool. It's in many different languages and contexts and has local species in it. And it really starts out by talking about the benefits of bats, why they're so important for pollination, many different ecosystem services. And then it gets into how bat-human interaction can be harmful. So you want people to take safeguards in their daily lives if they have bats in their homes, if they're potentially hunting bats or other interactions, but you want them to really be aware of why bats are important and why you shouldn't cut down the mango tree if you do have bats there, but you really need to live in harmony with them. And I think having those dialogues, it really gets to a very practical place about what can be done easily, where there are knowledge gaps, people have questions. You can see there's very good turnout in this one village and people of all ages. And so that gives me inspiration at the end of the day to see these amazing colleagues really around the world using tools like this and adapting it to the local needs. Then I want to show here, I know there was a great session yesterday that really involved climate smart agriculture. So you may see this and think, okay, we're talking about nutrition and livelihoods. We're talking about sustainable and local food systems. We're talking about resilience to climate change. So this is local crops. This is an aquaculture pond trying to really increase protein access. But actually, this is at a healthcare center, a clinic that my friends formed in Liberia. It's a palliative care center. And they said, look, our patients really need nutrition access. They need jobs training. They need, these crucial parts of our health that they're just not having access to. We could also think about, having reliable energy, electricity, to run the machines in the center. There are many different things that we can really approach this through a climate smart and planetary lens. So again, inspiration we need, of course, when we do investments to build this in and make sure we're having integrated programs that are not just healthcare, but also agriculture, food, jobs training, and environment. I want to showcase just one example of where I think we have a real opportunity to do this. I'm very honored to work on this project in Liberia. Thank you to USAID for supporting this. But there are some major conservation challenges in Liberia. It's a highly biodiverse country with a lot of endemic species, and it's also integral in terms of the remaining tropical forest there in terms for biodiversity, but also for carbon sequestration. So this project is really taking an integrated approach. It's looking to establish new protected areas, to improve and strengthen the management of existing protected areas, to increase prosperity and economic activities in communities living around those areas, so they're really empowered to be stewards and to keep those ecosystems intact and also improve their livelihoods, and then to promote economic growth through things like sustainable tourism and to do it really in the right way. And then lastly, to use a One Health approach across all of that, to consider connections to human health and really all sustainable development priorities. So Liberia has a very strong One Health coordination platform, so it's really an exciting place to try an approach like this. I hope we learn a lot, and I hope many colleagues will come to Liberia too and contribute to all of the conservation and health work that is being done through a One Health approach. Just to be a little bit, going back to the challenges that we face. So we need to be thinking, of course, about large-scale systematic change. And we can see here just, visually, these are not good things for our environment or for our health. But there are many different mechanisms. So, we can think about improving awareness in communities, but also with policymakers. We can think about impact assessments that are more comprehensive, that actually take a One Health approach. Improving coordination, just day-to-day information sharing, safeguards, incentives, cost-benefit analysis. I think the solutions, we can be creative in how to avoid outcomes like this and then the effects on our health, which are negative. Just lastly, context matters, of course. A One Health and planetary health approach, it's broad in some ways, but it's also very contextual, and it will vary in what it looks like in each setting and each priority and each need. But I think that the opportunities to use this in a really exciting way are immense. And it's about advancing equity. It's about understanding risks and addressing them more comprehensively. So I really think that we have the right people in the room to work on this. And I thank you so much for the opportunity and your interest. Thanks.
Okay, that was wonderful, Catherine, and all the other speakers got to sit here and watch your beautiful PowerPoints. But as I saw the photographer here and I see the screen right in front of us here, I'm going to change the optics and ask you all to come up now, as Matthew is going to be our next speaker. So you were spoiled sitting there. Now you have to be in the spotlight. So Matthew, you're up.
Glad I have a team up here with me now. Makes it a little easier. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. So I come from a little bit of a different approach in relation to what planetary health, One Health, eco-health, climate health, all of the healths look like. And I just kind of wanted to start off looking at global health, particularly global health and the law, because that's where I really started in getting really interested and passionate about planetary health in the first place, and I think it's a really good starting point. As we saw in the COVID-19 pandemic, global health law, particularly global health and international law, did not necessarily function the way that we thought it was going to in a lot of ways. And we also saw that there were a lot of different tangential fields that were related to global health that weren't necessarily, under the World Health Organization necessarily. We had human rights law, we had trade law, we had environmental law, we had all of these other different niches and these different perspectives that somehow translated into how we deal with a pandemic in the first place. And it's really crucial in looking at something like addressing the triple crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. There we go. So a lot of my work and research has actually looked at international law at large and how international law can be leveraged to benefit the public health sphere. So in 2005, the International Legal Commission actually released a report on fragmentation theory in relation to another concept known as regime interaction. And when I say regime, I don't mean that in a military sense. I mean it more in the sense of legal realms. So what we've seen with the international legal community is we continue to build more conventions, more policies, more different tribunals in order to kind of see how we build the multilateral space. And it's actually resulted with a lot of gaps, duplications, potential contradictions in how global governance functions on the international stage. Regime interaction, on the other hand, is in many ways the solution to that. It is seeing how we can leverage these different gaps, these different duplications, these different contradictions to actually move different abstract crises and their solutions forward. So that comes into play significantly in relation to planetary crises and trying to figure out how to govern them within multilateral institutions that were once created in a place where we didn't have to think about things like climate change necessarily. I mean, if you look at the law of the sea, for example, which I'm going to go into a little bit more later, the law of the sea was negotiated when climate change wasn't even being talked about on the international stage, yet it is now seen as such a crucial and binding instrument for how we look at environmental law and environmental governance in the first place. So in kind of trying to figure out, how do we govern within international law? How do we kind of move the global health and law agenda forward? That's how I stumbled upon the realm of planetary health. And I wanted to offer this definition because I think it actually works quite well with a lot of the research that I've done. Planetary health is a solutions-oriented, transdisciplinary field and social movement focused on analyzing and addressing the impacts of human disruptions to Earth's natural systems on human health and all life on Earth. And I think this functions really well because when we look at the international governance plane, in many ways, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to move development. We're trying to move the Sustainable Development Goals. We're trying to move all of these different entities for prosperity and well-being forward, regardless of the field that they're necessarily in. And I think one thing that is really crucial to the health field is that it is applicable in trade, in security, in all of these different entities, and can actually be used as a leverage mechanism to move human well-being and human prosperity, and environmental prosperity in particular, forward. So this diagram kind of looks at how anthropogenic or originating from human activity change has affected human health in the first place. And in the red, this is kind of where I focus on in relation to different modifying factors and different entities that are really, really, really putting us in a dangerous place with this triple crisis. But what I see the international governance structure and international legal community having an opportunity to do is almost reverse engineer what we see on this screen in a lot of ways. How do we use the systems that we have and the systems that are in place to actually move a planetary health agenda forward, to move a transdisciplinary and action-based community forward for the benefit of overall planetary well-being? And much of this work is actually being done by the Planetary Health Alliance, who I want to give a shout out to as they're the reason that I'm here with you today. So the Planetary Health Alliance is developing a policy strategy which will be informed by its members. We recently just brought on a new policy director, Liz Willits, who's going to be leading the charge. And one thing that is really important about the Alliance is that it's a diverse, inclusive community that's led by its members, that's met in a way where we figure out what's happening across the world, what people are interested in, what people are focused on, in order to be able to start building structures from the ground up to move an agenda forward. There are 18,000 plus individual members. There are 360 plus organizations from 60 plus different countries, which shows kind of the holistic approach that the Planetary Health Alliance is trying to take in moving this agenda forward. And similar to what Catherine talked about as well, we have a lot of terminology in the health field. We have public health, global health, One Health, planetary health, eco-health, climate health. But what I think is really important about planetary health is that it focuses on a paradigm shift, a mentality shift about how we see humanity in relation to the world at large. The term that we use doesn't necessarily matter as long as we're moving the mentality forward in the first place, as long as we're seeing ourselves as part of a system rather than the integral focal point of it. And in many ways, looking at international law and international governance, it's derived from humans, and thus it must be focused for humans. It's almost self-preserving in some ways. But I think what the international legal community loses focus on in a lot of ways is that we have to be seeing abstract crises as not just affecting humanity, but affecting the planet, and we need legal infrastructure to be able to understand that concept as well. And if we're going to continue to build new policies and new instruments, such as the new Pandemic Preparedness Treaty, we have to keep in mind that these systems have to be built within the greater planetary sphere. I think that this can very much be seen in similar conference settings like this one, for example. We consider CUGH a global health conference, but at the same time, we're here having a panel on climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution, which shows that our communities are starting to really understand what this means and what this entails, and trying to build this mentality shift in the first place. At the same time, we just saw at COP27 in Egypt, that's seen as an international environmental governance forum. But at the same time, the WHO had an entire health pavilion down on the ground in Egypt. And I think it's really important to look at the fact that we're starting to see the intersection of these different communities in the first place, particularly from a youth perspective, where youth are starting to see abstract crises no longer as abstract, as something that is affecting our daily lives. That's something that's going to affect our children, our grandchildren, and really seeing environmental crises as health crises in the first place. And it's really, really important looking at planetary health in the first place, because if you don't merge global health, environment, and all of these other fields, you're just fostering that same mentality of siloing these institutions in the first place. The World Health Organization, the United Nations Environment Program, the Food and Agricultural Organization, all of these have a focus on promoting health and well-being in some capacity. And what I love about planetary health is that it attempts to remind us. It attempts to show us that all of these organizations, in many ways, do have a common goal. And how do we bring different entities and different groups together for the promotion of planetary health well-being at large? One of the best examples I saw of this in person, actually, was with the new Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction agreement that the text was just agreed to up at the United Nations a month ago. This is seen as the High Seas Treaty. So since the international governance structure has started, the areas of the ocean that are not governed by different states have had kind of this hodgepodge, fragmented sphere of international legal realms that have governed it, and it's allowed for a lot of exploitation of the biodiversity on the high seas. However, over 2 weeks, I saw some of the greatest youth engagement on the international multilateral sphere that I've ever been able to see. As you can see here, there were people outside reminding governments why this High Seas Treaty needs to be passed, why this needs to be moved forward, in part because every second breath that we take is as a result of our ocean and having a healthy ocean in the first place. So you're starting to really see planetary health communities not just build, but promote passionate projects in this realm and having success, being able to help get texts adopted, to help get treaties moved forward. And it's something that I really hope to see in relation to the Pandemic Preparedness Treaty and the amendments to the international health regulations going forward. In saying that, I think it's important in particular to look at what youth engagement in the planetary health sphere looks like. And in my opinion, it's the result of an acknowledgement that environmental degradation is not merely an abstract thought. It's no longer in a place where it's just something out in the ether. We're seeing the effects of it every single day in every single way. And I don't need to tell any of you that because you wouldn't be here otherwise. But one thing that I think is really important in this realm is bringing those ideas and that mentality to communities that might not necessarily be thinking about it. You bring a term planetary health to a public audience and there's a cognitive dissonance. What does that mean? There's a lot of jargon there. But at the same time, what the mentality is trying to say is that we all need to share this common goal together and move forward health and well-being together. So how do we convey to people who are spending their lives worrying about maintaining a job, worrying about feeding their children, worrying about the daily struggles of everyday life, how do we go to them and say, we need you to worry about this too. We need you to worry about these abstract crises. How do we pivot and convey that message in a way that people actually want to adopt and understand? And I think the planetary health mentality is a very good way to start with that, particularly the different human health perspectives that we're seeing and how the environmental crises that we were seeing are really affecting people's daily lives. And I think we are going to get to a point where that level of security around these crises being abstract is no longer going to exist. And it's something that, as a youth, I have a lot of faith in my peers and colleagues to be able to assist with in the first place. On that note, I want to end looking at literacy in the health field, because I think it is very, very crucial and very, very important to identify why an audience cares, why you all should be coming to this conference in the first place, why we should be building international agreements and trying to move this agenda forward. And in many ways, this idea extends to people, governments, academia, and everyone around us, because we all are interconnected and we are interconnected with the world around us. And I think one thing that we need to start continuing to look at is how to move that idea forward in a way where it is a public entity and something that everyone can understand so that we can all move forward a planetary health agenda forward. So I just want to thank you for the time for being here. If you want any more information about the Planetary Health Alliance, please follow us on social media or at our website here. And I really hope you leave this session today being inspired, particularly the youth in the room, to bring all of us back to a better place for holistic well-being. Thank you.
Matthew, thank you very much. And speaking of literacy, if any of you took a picture of his definition of planetary health, take that home with you. Dr. Sharon Deem.
Thanks, Jonathan. Good afternoon. I'm thrilled to be here and be part of this session and to be with my esteemed colleagues. So I'm really happy. And such an important session to be in. I have no conflict of interest. And I thought I'd start by talking about a global health conference I was at a number of years before COVID. And it was in St. Louis, and I was talking to the global health professionals, and I talk about animal health a lot. And I was surprised at the end of my conversation, the number of health professionals, global health professionals that came up to me and said, Sharon, I never think about animals. I never think about animals when I think of my human global health patients. And that really sort of hit me, struck me, right? And that was a number of years before COVID. And look at us now. We have a planetary health session here in a global health conference. So we've moved a long way, and we have ways to go. So like my colleagues, these terms have come up again, and when I was putting together my few minutes for you all today, I did what all good scientists do. I went to Wikipedia, and I got the terms for each of these. So global health is an area for study, research, and practice that place a priority for improving health and achieving equity in health for humans worldwide. One Health is an integrated, unifying approach that aims to sustainably balance and optimize health for people, animals, and ecosystems. And planetary health refers to the health of human civilization and the state of the natural ecosystems on which it depends. And I think we can all look at those three terms and think, wow, these are good ideas, right? And this holistic approach is really important if we're going to have global health for people, animals, and the planet. So Jonathan mentioned earlier, I teach a One Health semester-long course at WashU in St. Louis, and we start our semester off thinking about the greatest challenges, the greatest threats to our shared One Health. And then we spend the semester looking at what are the solutions to these greatest challenges. And you'll see those first three are the name of our session, right? So climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. But you see those other challenges as well, and we can pretty much understand how they all interact with each other. And what I'd like to do in my few minutes with you is hopefully get across 3 points, just 3 takeaways, I hope. And these first 2 slides are the first takeaway. And if we think about planet Earth roughly 10,000 years ago, and the terrestrial vertebrate biomass on the planet, we would find that 98% of it was the lions and tigers and bears and all those non-domestic species, and only 2% were we humans and those few poor wolves that we domesticated, right? So if we fast forward to today, we know that that pie chart has flip-flopped. So 98% of the terrestrial vertebrate biomass is the 8 billion of us and the billions and billions of livestock and pet species that keep our lives to be as healthy as they are. And I think those 2 charts are really important when we think about global health and how we can have global health for our human society, our human civilization, but the planet as a whole. So over the course of my career, I've thought a lot about food security and how do we feed the human population, right? And 8 billion and counting of us. How do we safely do this? And when we think of those big threats, we can look at ruminants and livestock and methane production and how that works in with climate change, or antibiotic-resistant genes and the antibiotics that are used for livestock production, or emerging infectious diseases. And so I'm going to spend the last part of my time thinking about emerging infectious diseases, right? And again, we know that the majority of these for our species are zoonotic, and we also know the anthropogenic drivers of those, and many of them listed here, land degradation and climate change and the illegal and even legal trade in wildlife, livestock agricultural production. Catherine showed some really excellent photos of that earlier. And paradoxically, biodiversity loss is also part of the emergence, even though a number of these pathogens may be coming from wildlife reservoirs. So the loss of biodiversity is actually impacting human health, even in the emerging infectious disease area. So why is that, right? So we know that spillover events are increasing. It's recently been put forward that there are hundreds of thousands of viruses and pathogens that may still be harbored in reservoir species around the globe. So wildlife species that naturally have these potential human pathogens that could have a zoonotic impact. But again, I would challenge us as the global health leaders of the world, of the globe, to think why this might be happening, right? Why are spillover events increasing? I use this photo a lot. It's from a number of years ago. I lived in Gabon, West Africa, and I did sea turtle conservation, and this is a sea turtle workshop on the beach. We're in a cafe, and this orphan chimp walked in, right? So just one example of that intersection of human and animals and how spillover events can be occurring. But I can't not talk about COVID, of course, and if you've been following the news in the last three years or so, we have origin stories out there right now, right? the lab leak theory and the nature theory. I'm not going to talk much about lab leak, but if you remember a slide or two ago, when we know there's hundreds of thousands of potential pathogenic zoonotic viruses out there, we can understand why science is really looking at this in a scientific way. But I want to think more about this quote, nature theory. And I would challenge us to really want to call this nature, right? So if we think about wet markets or the mixing and matching of a number of wildlife animals and domestic animals, and some alive, some dead, and they're peeing and pooing on each other, and we'll grab one of those and take it home to feed our family, I think we can really understand how spillover may occur and how this really isn't nature, right? And there's been, in the recent months, there's been some really great science coming out that are showing us that, an animal reservoir for this incredibly tragic pandemic that we've been living through over the last few years. So my second take home is, like, wildlife are not the bad guys, right? So wildlife are not out there trying to think, what's the next emerging pathogen we can put on the human population, right? It's this changing anthropogenic interaction that we humans are creating with our animal companions here on this planet. And the third point is really, wildlife are not only not the bad guys, they may even be the good guys, right? We know how much biodiversity helps us, as been brought out by the first two speakers so far, of the need for nature and biodiversity. And this is just one small example of a study I was fortunate to be a part of, in which we show that the mere presence of the forest and free-living monkeys around these communities in Brazil actually was preventive for arboviruses in the human communities. So they were acting as a sink and preventing zoonotic pathogens in these communities. So the wildlife, the biodiversity, as the good guys. And I'm just going to end, taking that point one step farther, because there's been so much talk in the One Health and planetary health, and I just call it intergalactic health, so there you go. But I really think, the understanding as global health professionals of the importance of nature and biodiversity, right? The studies that are showing that we humans have this love of life, and it is important for our health spiritually, psychologically, emotionally, and even physically. The studies are adding up. These are just two examples of studies we've done at the St. Louis Zoo, looking at human psychological and physiologic health benefits of a day at the zoo and interacting with animals and nature. And we really know that these are positive and that we humans need the biodiversity that remains on our planet. So I'm going to end with that. I so look forward to the discussion and hope we have lots of good questions and comments. Thank you.
Sharon, thank you very much. And I'm glad that you brought up ecosystem services, because that's a perfect lead-in for Dr. Kumar from UNEP.
Thank you, Professor Patz. Organizers, Dr. Keith Martin, thanks for having me here. So we are talking about, planetary crisis. And when we talk about it, there are three dominant crises we talk about. One is climate change, and we all know about climate change. Paris Agreement is not going to go anywhere, and the emission gap report done by UNEP and launched in last COP27 in Sharm el Sheikh has clearly shown that the way we are moving, by 2030, the emission is going to rise by 140%. And that means 240% rise in the coal, 57 in gas, and 71% in oil. Even if we give some kind of flexibility and overshooting in climate change, let's say 2 degrees Celsius, not 1.5, still emission is going to go up by 50% by 2030. This is a global number. So it has implications for many things, certainly for public health. And that literature is more or less in final stage now, and all of you are expert. Then the second crisis we always talk is the nature or biodiversity. Catherine, you mentioned about 1 million species under risk of extinction as done by IPBES. That is correct. There are other kind of crises also which is happening along with this nature umbrella term. Mangrove has gone down by 40% since 1970. Wetland, nearly 60% decline. And one can go on. The idea is not to give you these statistics, but the just sense that the second crisis, biodiversity and nature, is also happening, and it has huge implications for public health. The third is the pollution, and people have referred about it. There are statistics, some rough estimate available, that 9 million people are dying, which is 7 to 8% of the global GDP. And all these three components, if they are in a good shape, they contribute to human well-being. They contribute to the compass of the progress. We sometimes call it GDP or wealth. I'm coming to that in a minute. But still, it is not there. I mean, you talk to National Treasury, Governor of Federal Bank, finance ministers. We had a whole week in the bank and IMF a spring meeting, and you are at loss. Of course, climate is being talked. They are sensitive, but in the usual calculations, when they calculate, when they design fiscal policy, trade policy, monetary policy, they consider sovereign wealth funds, debt management, the kind of things we understand is still not there. And that is a serious problem. One of the reason for that is that still we are not speaking the language they understand, and we don't want to understand them. I mean, they have huge problem, and they means the constituency which talks the language of finance and economics. Job crisis, the economy is going down. People are in 44 countries are under, they are on the brink of starvation by the end of this year. It's a serious trouble. People are losing job. The economy is going down. So they have their own challenges. But that does not mean that planetary crisis should not become the part of the grammar of the development. If we don't do that, then this pandemic was just a trailer. There could be many more. And in that context, the issue is how to make this nexus of planetary crisis and human health being captured in the normal statistics on which our basic production, consumption, and distribution decisions are based in everyday life. Unless we do that, we can't think of having sustainable policies and one operationalization of One Health, planetary health, integrated approach. It will be a very good idea, nice lamp post, but implementation will remain weak. And in that context, how to change the conventional statistics? Yep. So, sustainability requires that the contribution of natures and to human health is captured. We do not talk only in terms of flow, everyday earning, that is the GDP, income, but we should talk about the wealth for two reasons. When we talk about intergenerational sustainability, when we die, we are not going to pass our income to our children. We are going to pass the asset, and we must know how much asset we have inherited. So business companies are very smart, by the way. They keep track of their balance sheet, but the nations, not all, but most of the nations, they miserably fail. They just focus on income, not on the wealth. And there are different kind of trade-offs that can be resolved if we focus on the wealth, not income alone. And of course, we talk about Sustainable Development Goals, 17 goals, and the targets and the indicators. I'm not going to talk about them, but you can keep track of that if you have your compass in place through the measurement called inclusive wealth. So this is something I thought I will share with you, and many of you probably might know. When UNEP tried to estimate the inclusive wealth, so inclusive wealth here is the produced capital, the computer, the machine, the building, equipments, normal goods. And then you have natural capital and the human capital. Health part will come in human capital along with education part and skill formation. GDP is showing going up, but the natural capital is showing going down. That is very serious, because then what happens, and that is what has also happened globally since 1950s, or the age of the Anthropocene, that we have amassed wealth at the cost of the nature, and we are facing different kind of crises. And precisely for that reason, we must keep track of inclusive or comprehensive wealth. So per capita natural capital is on decline, but per capita all kind of other capitals from 1992 to 2019, that is where we had the data, for 163 countries. So it is not for 200 countries of the world, but 163 countries. There was no reason to exclude any other country, but the data was like that. So this is showing that income, what we are treating, is kind of illusionary, and it is not giving us a good sense of direction for intervention to implement planetary health or One Health approach as well. The nexus of planetary health and the human health, if we take the root of the wealth measurement, it can clearly will tell that how much contribution or negative contribution, both malign or benign impact from planetary crisis to human health is happening. That this can tell you. Of course, this can also tell you a lot of benefits which restoration can provide, and we are in the even decades of restoration starting from 21 going up to 2030. This will also help greatly in operationalizing the One Health approach. It will certainly give you a realistic sense of the rate of return on the investment. Right now, what is happening, many of the spending on planetary health, restoration, conservation, and public health is being treated by many of the poor countries, or at least the countries in the South, as expenditure, but they are investment. How an expenditure will be treated as investment only when you estimate the rate of return or the kind of benefits that can be done once you have estimate for a stock of capital or inclusive wealth. So that is what I know the kind of topic we are talking here. Probably this might look a bit cryptic, but I'm happy to take questions or any comments once we are done. Thanks.
And our final speaker is Tamer Rabi from the World Bank.
Thank you. First of all, a very good afternoon to everyone. I'm delighted to be here today to join you in today's panel discussion. I'm not sure this is not my presentation, I guess. Sorry, we're just having a small technical issue with the presentation.
Are you hitting?
Well, while we get the presentation up, I just wanted to say that I'm delighted to be here today to speak on behalf of the World Bank. Thanks so much. That is a presentation, yes. So, and obviously what we're talking about today is extremely important to all of us, and perhaps a reminder for me as much as it is for everybody else, why are we here? We're talking about a triple crisis, but people really are at the heart of these three crises, the intersection of these three crises that we're talking about. And because of that, one of the things that I'd like to focus on today is the kind of work that we've been doing at the World Bank to really try and translate the challenges, the evidence that they're actually, that we're able to come up with at a country level, and how that's been informing our investments and operations at a country level. And by doing so, again, putting really people at the heart of what we do, and this is why the title of the presentation, focusing on people at the heart of climate investment and action. I want to remind everybody of the challenge. Again, many of you have seen this. There are two parts to this slide, and I want to focus on both sides of the slide because they're both extremely important. On the left-hand side of the slide, you see the pathways from climatic exposures to health outcomes. And this is a diagram that was in the New England Journal of Medicine that we're showing these direct, indirected, as well as ecosystem-mediated pathways from climatic exposures, be it through temperature, precipitation, or extreme events, leading to health outcomes in relation to vector-borne, waterborne diseases, and the like. So the range of different outcomes obviously is extremely important. But we should not forget again, and I keep repeating that people are at the heart of this crisis. The vulnerable populations that are being affected by these climatic exposures. So the pathways are important, but people are equally important to be put into the picture. So vulnerable populations are women and children. They're the elderly. They're the healthcare workers, those on the front line. They're some of those refugees that are even, now we hear more and more about climate refugees, those that are being pushed into those contexts as a result of the climate crisis. So that's one part of the story, which is just really looking at the impact of the climate crisis on human health and well-being. But there's another part of the story. And may I remind you all, we're not innocent as those working in the health sector from our contribution also to the climate crisis as a system. In fact, analyses that have been done to date have shown that the health sector has a huge or quite a non-significant contribution to carbon emissions. Based on analysis that we did at the World Bank, we've seen that in middle-income countries, health systems are contributing anywhere between 4 to 5% of total emissions. In high-income economies, that figure could be as high as 10 to 11%. So if we are to think about how we tackle the climate crisis moving forward, sticking with what the IPCC has been pushing us really to ensure that we're not contributing further to the crisis, I think there's a lot that needs to be done and a lot that needs to be said from a health sector perspective. Right now, based on projections, between now and end of century, we're seeing that we are moving more and more towards a 4-degree warmer globe. And that's catastrophic in itself. You may have seen this diagram. It was in the Assessment Report 6, the IPCC Assessment Report 6. And again, it's a fine reminder that that people really are at the heart of this crisis. What we're seeing in this diagram is the temperature increases, if you will, in comparison to pre-industrial times. So we're looking at how temperatures have been moving since the 1900s up until today, how they're projected using 5 different climatic scenarios to move to move by the end of the century. And of course, it's no surprise that things are getting warmer and warmer by the day. In fact, what the diagram is also trying to show is it's following 3 generations more or less. Our children, I should say our parents at the beginning. So that's at the very bottom of the slide. Us in the middle, and the 3rd generation, meaning our children, and where things would be going, for those 3 generations moving forward. And it's very clear that if we don't do something about this, clearly there's going to be huge impacts on future generations to come. Now, I cannot be from the World Bank and not talk about some economics and tell you a little bit more about poverty and how we've been looking at this. And in fact, based on an assessment that we did about 2 years ago, we were trying to estimate the impact of the climate crisis on extreme poverty by 2030, and that means those that are living on less than $1.90 a day. What we've seen as a result of this analysis, and this is using 5 different channels, if you will, with a number, well, thousands of models. Actually, this was a huge analysis, is that 132 million people will be pushed into extreme poverty by 2030 as a result of climate change. And interestingly enough, out of those 132 million, 44 million people would be pushed as a result of impacts from health. So that's a huge number. This is obviously looking at a high climatic scenario. But even when you take the more optimistic scenarios, we're still looking at 25 million people being pushed into extreme poverty by the climate crisis as a result of health impacts. This also, is very much aligned with other work that we've been doing, and I'm going to speak in a minute or two about this other work that we've been doing in trying to really quantify the cost of inaction. And what we've been seeing is that through what we are calling a climate and health economic valuation, we're seeing that the impacts of climate change due to health are costing economies today as high as 1% of GDP, and that's an extremely conservative estimate. And this is today. This is not even looking at where those impacts are going to be in the 2030s or the 2050s or by the end of the century if we continue with business as usual. So I'm not using those figures now because it's a bit too scary for me. I need to make sure that we vet it more within within the wider community before those figures are put out. But they are scary. So how did we then tackle, or how did we think about, in the World Bank perspective, that the ways to deal with the climate crisis from a health sector perspective? And I'm going to take you on a journey. And the journey basically starts by understanding, first of all, vulnerability. And this is how I came into thinking about establishing this program for the World Bank that focuses on the health, climate, environment, and disaster links. So we're actually looking at the intersection between climate and environmental health and global health in general. And what we've done is we've started by using the University of Notre Dame's ND GAIN index, which really looks at climatic exposures. It also uses that index to bring in the kind of health system vulnerabilities. We coupled that with our own human capital index in the World Bank to be able to sort of try and see where are some of the hotspots, if you will, when it comes to climate and health. And I need to be very careful in using the word hotspots. The reason I'm saying this is because I think the entire world is a hotspot. So this is not a single country. The whole world needs to be mindful. Those in low, middle, as well as high-income economies are not immune to the impacts of climate change and what that can cause. But what it at least did for us is it gave us a prioritization list, or a prioritized list of where we can start our action. From there, we needed to be able to understand what that meant at a country level. So I'm going to be just focusing your attention on 3 analytics or diagnostics that we've developed in that respect, really to understand what is the kind of advice that we can provide to governments, how do we structure our investments and our lending program to those countries that are impacted the most by the climate crisis. First one was really putting in place what's known as a climate and health vulnerability assessment, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail in a minute. The second one is what I referred to earlier, which is the climate and health economic valuation. And this is, when I was talking about the kind of impact that we're seeing happening as a result of the climate crisis and due to health risks. And then the last one is the carbon sector footprint, which I talked about at the beginning, saying that anywhere between 4 to 5% of health sector activity is contributing to the climate crisis in terms of carbon emissions. But let's just very quickly, have a quick deep dive on what these climate and health vulnerability assessments do and why we're putting them into action, really to inform our investments. So it looks at, the climatology. This is the starting point. Before we can even start talking about the health impacts, we need to be able to understand what's happening at a country level in terms of the climatic exposure. This is temperature, this is precipitation, this is humidity, this is sea level rise where it's applicable. This is also in looking at extreme events like droughts, like heat waves, like floods. And we need to be able to get some sense what is the story behind this historically, but equally so in terms of projections. Where are we likely to be by the 2030s and the 2050s? And I'm not really too interested in by the end of century in this case, because we're trying to be very policy oriented. We're trying to make sure that we're speaking to people's timelines. If I'm sitting down with a Minister of Health or with a Minister of Finance, what's far more important for me is to tell him what's going to be happening within the time space that they're in office. Not so much about what's going to happen at the end of the century. At least that's how you would tackle that. But at the same time, in looking at these climatic exposures, it's also important to be able to see, well, how are those going to be impacting on these climate risks? Very much, what the kind of talk that we all get into, in this community. So where are your vector-borne diseases? Where are you waterborne diseases? How likely are we to see, for example, diarrhea moving or stunting, in future generations? But beyond these two, the climatic, exposures and the health risks, which are really just trying to tell you what the problem is from a health sort of sector perspective, we need to be able to look at this also from a systems perspective. And what I mean by that is how well prepared are those health systems in those countries to be able to deal with these risks that we're referring to. And that's where we come to talk about adaptive capacities. Adaptive capacity of a health system, we look at it in terms of the 6 health system building blocks. We look at financing, we look at governance, we look at service delivery, organization, we look at human resources, information systems, and all of that really to try to identify if there are any gaps, if you will, within those systems to deal with the risks. Based on that, obviously, we make recommendations, and you may be familiar already with this diagram here. I mean, this is the WHO's Health Systems Resilience Framework that takes into account what I was just talking about a moment ago, which is the 6 health system building blocks. And in the outer circle of this diagram, it actually relates it to the kind of actions that can be taken to move towards more resilient health systems. The second diagnostic that I referred to was the climate and health economic valuation, and I just wanted to be able to show the kind of rigor that we're applying into this. We're taking a 2-step approach for valuing the economic impacts from health. The first one is very much in line with looking at what's known as, for those that are epidemiologists in the audience, they'll be able to relate to that, the population attributable fraction of the burden of disease that is climate-driven. Now, in simple terms, that's just basically saying what is the share of those cases, be it morbidity or mortality, that is climate-driven. And what we do is we're using those response functions that have already been vetted at the global level. This is by academics as well as by development partners, including obviously our colleagues at the World Health Organization, to be able to really look at this share, if you will, of the burden of disease that is climate-driven. We're looking at 6 health risks, and this is the first of its kind in that sense. Most other assessments have looked at a maximum of 2 or 3 health risks. We're looking at vector-borne diseases in terms of malaria and dengue. We're looking at stunting. We're looking at diarrhea. We're looking at heat, morbidity, and mortality. And we're looking at mortality from extreme events like flooding in this case. Based on that, and once we've been able to estimate, if you will, this proportion of the total of the disease burden that is climate-driven, we then start applying a dollar value to that. Now, there's already a lot of science, behind this, and many economists have used different methods of trying to put a dollar value on these impacts, and we're following in the same track. So we're using the value of a statistical life to put a dollar value in terms of mortality and the cost per episode to come up with morbidity. And in both of them in conjunction is what gives us then the climate and health economic impacts at a country level. So great. I mean, all of this so far has just been telling a story of what the problem is, but what do we do about it? Well, at the World Bank, what we've been trying to do is we've been trying to think about this in terms of a number of different levels. The first one is providing technical assistance, because most of our client countries will come and they will seek technical assistance from the World Bank to be able to give them the best advice that they can to inform their operations and programming. So this is not about necessarily the bank coming in providing any form of financing, but it's about the bank coming in really providing the best global knowledge that we have out there in terms of what can be done. We've worked in Latin America. Here are just some few examples. Of course, this is not the broad range of what the bank has been doing, but just a few examples to focus your attention on areas that we've assisted our client countries on. We've worked on helping them to build resilient health systems, putting in place resilient health system strategies, like in the case of Belize and Colombia. Nigeria was our first country that came in, and they really wanted to have some focus on energy efficiency, trying to really understand what does that mean in healthcare service delivery? How can we move to a more energy efficient health system that also is playing a role in terms of mitigating, if you will, the climate crisis? Egypt, around COP27, just before COP27, was extremely interested in understanding what does it mean to go forward on green health insurance. So it was the first time for us to hear about green health insurance, and based on that, we tried to develop what was known as green health financing, and we could speak a little bit more about that in the panel. On the operational side, again, just from some few examples of where bank investments went. In Madagascar, for example, given the fact that we've seen that a lot of the prevalence of nutrition is also driven by climate, we've put in place data systems that would allow to look at really the interlink between nutrition and climate. In Yemen, it was about integrated early warning systems, and we've been assisting, obviously, them through thinking about these integrated early warning systems that bring in a number of different parameters into play. Ghana, this was around the time of the COVID crisis and the pandemic, and of course, with the expansion of the distribution of vaccines, the Ghanaian government was extremely interested in seeing how can we move towards more of a low-carbon, sustainable vaccine distribution system, and this is where the bank came, to provide for additional support on that. I'm going to end. I know I have less than 30 seconds, so I'm going to try and be extremely quick on this, just to say that in moving forward on this and to scale up our thinking, this is not necessarily just for the bank, but perhaps for many of us to be thinking about. It's a health systems issue. We need to be focusing our attention on making sure that our health systems are speaking to this climate crisis and are able to deal with that. It's an economics issue. We need to be able to understand the climate economics, the impacts that it has on health, that it has on well-being. We need to be able to put in place the data and data systems that can actually help us reach that evidence and be able to inform our governments, moving forward. And of course, it's on the operational side, i.e., the financing. So here are just some few examples, and I'm just going to put them all on the screen at once, just to highlight potentially what I'm talking about. But I do want to focus your attention on the health systems. You've already heard me speak about the climate and health vulnerability assessments. There's another part which is extremely important, particularly for the clinical community. This is about clinical care pathways. How can we move forward with the research that is needed to be able to inform our physicians and our healthcare providers what it means to be moving on to a low-carbon sustainable clinical care pathway? On the economics, I just want to point your attention to actually one of them, which is the one in the middle, and that's the best buys. And the reason is every place I'm going to now, we're always talking about the best buys for climate and health. What do I mean by that? Well, it's great. Well, I don't know if it's great, but it's good to know what the what the economic impact is on as a result of the climate crisis on health. But what is far more important to know is what would be the cost benefit if you were to apply certain interventions that are cost effective at scale at a country level. So the best buys is exactly what we mean by that. It is a sort of comparative analysis that looks at the cost effectiveness of different interventions for different outcomes and how those can be scaled up. We are at the moment working on the third stream in coming up with an integrated data platform. There is already a platform that the bank has established, which is known as the Climate Change Knowledge Portal, that includes the climatic exposures. But right now we're working on a platform that will be bringing in climate, health, economics, demographics, so on and so forth. And I'm going to end here. Thank you so much.
Wow, that's a lot to digest. And I want to, while we're thinking of questions, I want to ask you, pose the panel, and you don't all have to answer this, but those who feel inspired. In the morning plenary, there was a debate about expanding the focus of global health. And I think to all of us here in this room, you're here because you're understanding we're trying to get to the root issues, what's underneath the symptoms and the diseases that we see. So I want to just ask any of you to talk about some success stories where we're actually, this framework of planetary and health, One Health, looking beyond the diseases right in front of us and to look at the root causes, to think, give us some either success stories or, if not success stories, some first needed steps to really embrace this concept of nature-based solutions, sort of the One Health approach and getting to the root causes.
I think I have the mic. That's on? Yeah. Okay. So I'm just going to start us off, but I'm not going to do an exact success story, but I think I kind of alluded to it in my talk. I think just the fact that we're all here talking about this, that we as the global health community have input from all sectors, and that we not only are identifying the challenges that I think each of us have put out there, that from the climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution, and those other long lists, the challenges are no longer disputed like they were just a decade ago. There's still there's some debate out there, I'm sure, right? But we understand these challenges, and then those solutions, which is your question, is the very thing we spend all semester with my young students coming up with those solutions. And I think what I would say in a general sense is now, unlike when I was at that stage, we have the disciplines that are coming together. So it's not just the human health person or the veterinarian or the social worker or the economist or the engineer or the politician. And those groups really are coming together on so many platforms. Locally, where I am in St. Louis, we have a lot of these teams now working on some of the health disparities just in our town, some of the conservation challenges, and I know we can scale that up globally, which many of us in this panel are doing. So that's a kind of general answer to the question.
Thank you. It's a great answer. I'll just add a bit to it that, I think we know the global drivers. Certainly when we look at something like disease emergence, we know the global drivers. When we look at climate change, we know the drivers. Biodiversity, we know the drivers. The solutions at more of the community and national level really vary. And I think, even from a conservation standpoint, a lot is happening that's necessary, but we don't always think about the social aspects. I see Gina is here. I'm glad you're here. And that aspect of why do people make certain decisions? We're all policymakers at the end of the day. And certain instances, you're really surprised when you go and talk to community members, when you do knowledge, attitude, and practice studies. Sometimes it really is just a knowledge gap. Maybe it's a cultural gap, or and it's sometimes it is an economic gap too. But there are many different reasons, and it's not always predictable. And I think taking the time to do that, we think a lot about the conservation process of land tenure and the challenges there. And it is a really intensive process, and it should be, because you want it to be free, prior informed consent, free of bias, sometimes knowledge, awareness about what it means to give your forest as a concession. What are the long-term consequences? It's not the consequences tomorrow, which may be very positive for a community economically. It's really thinking long-term. And so there's a lot at stake in terms of addressing those root causes. I think we have to do a lot better in investing in the human capital. And I know the bank is doing that in the workforce development, but also the community development. I think we're really missing that piece in terms of that local solution and community empowerment and leadership.
Great, thank you. Did you want to say something, Matthew? Go for it.
One just very small thing that I wanted to add, very, very tangential to what you both were saying. I think we're also starting to understand the politics of a lot of this and how to translate this. Similar to what Pushpam was saying, we're starting to understand the languages of how to convey this to an audience. There's a poll that went out looking at how many people believed in climate change versus how many people were seeing more adverse weather events. And there is a staunch difference between those who believed in the latter rather than the former. And I think we're starting to very much see that within Planetary Health and One Health. Just one small anecdote I wanted to add. I was at a dinner actually talking with a military strategist. And by the end of the dinner, the military strategist was able to colloquially use the term planetary health. So I think we're starting to understand how to translate and have these dialogues in a way that they are understood across public audiences. And I think that's a significant success story to share.
Great. I want to move to the international agencies, and I want to ask this question of both you, Pushpam, and also Tamer. So as far as nature capital and evaluating nature's contribution to health, how far are we in making some revised estimates, and is that being appreciated and leading towards a shift away from GDP to some other index of progress? And then, Tamara, I'm going to ask you about something about the World Bank. Go ahead, Pushpam, first.
Thank you. Yes, so on beyond GDP, or basically looking for a metrics which is beyond GDP, there has been a good progress. I mean, starting from the top, there is something called the Common Agenda of the Secretary General, and that clearly talks and tries to persuade the member states, and I'm coming to the individual countries in a minute, that we must move beyond GDP. I mean, you at the top level, the staff in the UN, where you have to handle the crisis of food and the earthquake and North Korea, it does not happen that every day they talk about beyond GDP, but now it is being done. So that is one. G20 countries, they are talking about it. If you talk about individual countries, you have seen HMT review in UK by Sir Parthadas Gupta that we must move beyond GDP, and ONS, Office of National Statistics, they are working on it to estimate the wealth. You have seen the announcement from White House here, OSPT, Office of Science, Policy and Technology, and they are, in fact, next week they have a meeting that how to move beyond GDP. So there is a lot happening. If you talk about countries, I know a number of countries in Africa, in South Asia, in Amazonia, and elsewhere where people have started doing. So in fact, there is a good news. Second, on human health and planetary crisis, I think there is a bigger news. Whatever convention you talk about, so biodiversity, wetland, Ramsar, climate change, or land degradation, human health remains in the center, I would say. It was not the case 10 years or 5 years back. People have started realizing that all these things are not bereft of the urgency to address human health, and that is a good sign. But it will be an exalted self if we all start believing that things are very rosy, people are very receptive. Still, there is a big challenge. One more thing here I would like to say, and that is for this kind of audience, that we need to communicate. I'm not saying scientists should become a communicator all the time and start giving simple and flatly wrong messages, but keep your 10% time to talk to people, the media, social media. See, the land is fertile. If you guys don't do that, some other guys will do, and the weeds will come, and that will not be good. So please take that responsibility. Your scientific paper, very good, do that. But at least 5-10% time and effort should also go in reaching out to the people, politicians, and the policymakers who are responsible for the action on the ground.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Tamer, so what is the World Bank doing to maximize finance that's related to climate and health? And is the World Bank committing to some criteria by which they won't give out funds unless these responsibilities are being met? No pressure.
I'm going to stand up because I guess some people cannot see me from here. First of all, thank you so very much for that question, and I think it's an important question. Indeed, I think that the 2015 Paris Agreement was a unique moment for us in global development, and as a result of the Paris Agreement, the bank in 2016 developed its first climate change action plan, and it is through that climate change action plan that the bank committed itself to an organization-wide of 35% of its financing going to climate by fiscal year 2025. And we've been ambitious enough to push ourselves even further by saying that by 2030, that figure would go up to 75%, meaning that out of every $100 that we're spending, 75% of those are 75 of those are going to climate co-benefits, i.e. climate adaptation or mitigation. Second thing that happened is that we started developing what's known as these climate country development reports, CCDRs. And the idea that those are being done at a country level, and the idea is actually to be looking at the intersection between climate change, climate policies, and general development, including health, and the kind of actions that can be taken at a country level to be able to deal with those issues. The third thing I think is that by far the biggest game changer, it's starting of July 1st of this year, the Board of Executive Directors of the World Bank will not, and I emphasize, will not approve any project that will not show that it's applying to the Paris Agreement. That's a huge game changer in my view. Thank you.
Wow, that's some good news. So let's open up to audience questions, and because Keith Martin is here, we might be able to go beyond 4 o'clock by 5 minutes. I don't know. Okay. Over 10 minutes. All right. Okay. And please introduce yourself.
Hi there. I'm Liza Dunn. I'm from Bayer Crop Science in St. Louis, and so welcome.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
I'm Liza Dunn. I'm from Bayer Crop Science in St. Louis. I'm an emergency medicine physician and a medical toxicologist. And I have a question about implementation science. Sri Lanka, as you know, last year, about 18 months ago, made some big changes in its agricultural policies that were implemented, and that led to a cascading effect where their healthcare system and their banking system completely fell apart. What have we learned from that, and can we do, because we don't want the population to, and the economies to collapse. So what have we learned from those? They made those changes because of climate change interests. So how can we prevent that from happening so we can achieve this goal successfully?
So time out. Did you all get that question? Somebody? So remember that, because we're going to batch the questions, okay? So Catherine, you've got that? You've got that? All right. Okay. So pay attention. we're going to go ahead. Next question.
Thank you very much. All fantastic talks. Nick Bass from London. All really good talks. But I was particularly interested in the World Bank one. And it's great news about what the World Bank is planning to do. We have to remember, though, that a lot of the countries, the lowest income countries where problems need fixing and a lot of this bad practice needs reversing, have been doing this as a result of...
Time out. It could be that I'm getting older, but come closer to the mic.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Good.
Okay.
Okay.
A lot of this embedded bad practice is a result of decades of requirements from your sister organisation, the IMF. And I'm just wondering, with all your fantastic plans that you've announced, and your colleague mentioned some yesterday as well, are you working in tandem with the IMF, and are they involved in this? And to what extent are the poorest, most vulnerable countries in the world who are going to be impacted most by all of this informing the decision making and the plans and the ideas and the way you're going about doing this?
Great. We'll take Nina's question, and then we'll take a pause, and then we'll take the person in the back in the next round. Go ahead, Nina.
Hi, I'm Nina Jamal from 4PAW's work on animal welfare preventing pandemics. So we heard that human health cannot exist in isolation. We need to prevent spillover. There is a fragmentation in policy. Currently, at the moment, we need to view health and protecting nature as an investment rather than expenditure. All this makes sense. And we have the pandemic treaty, the treaty to prevent, prepare, and respond to pandemics. It's obviously an opportunity. Who would you have conversations with to convince them to expand our thinking and scope, that we cannot just think about human health as global health, but as one health and planetary health? How would you do it?
Okay. Kath, you want to go for the first question? And can you repeat the question?
Yes. I'll try to kind of batch them. So
Okay.
I think the crisis in Sri Lanka, I think it kind of comes down to some of these are very predictable outcomes. Sometimes, you have a level of uncertainty, but I think one minister could say, we anticipate XYZ happening if this is put into place. I think that's where these One Health coordination platforms are very important. I would love to see these platforms taking on things like, should we commit to the pandemic instrument? How can it be strengthened? I haven't seen that happening. I think that's something we really should advocate. It shouldn't be just the IHR focal point. Maybe you can make this argument in your meeting this week, but it's such a golden opportunity. And I don't think it should just be, health outcomes. I think it could be really across sustainable development that these One Health coordination platforms, or whatever the countries are calling them, multi-sectoral coordination platforms, they're just not taking that stance now about land use planning. And I think it's a big missed opportunity. It's certainly not a cost-effective way of making decisions in a single siloed approach. And I think from our community here, we talk about health in all policies. We're not doing that at a national level. We need to be working across ministries. I'll just add one thing. At the World Bank meeting this week, there was a minister, I believe he was from Mozambique, and he said, I'm an agriculture minister now. I was an environment minister. And he made this beautiful, he didn't say One Health, but he was saying, we're talking about phosphates and revolutionizing, agricultural systems. And we need to take a step back and think about environment too. And that was music to my ears. So I think that there is some fundamental change, but we really need that to become very routine.
Okay. And Tamer, what about the IMF?
Yeah, I think that the work with the IMF is already ongoing right now as we speak. Obviously, the IMF is coming in focusing more on the macroeconomic policies that will impact the kind of investments that the World Bank is putting, Sorry? No, not to me. Okay. So the kind of obviously investments that the World Bank is putting on the ground. I think that in moving forward, obviously more of that coordination needs to happen, not just between the bank and the IMF, but the wider development community. And today's a fine example of what we're trying to do. I'm grateful for Dr. Martin's invitation, Dr. Patz's invitation to this event today, because it's about building those partnerships. It's about ensuring that we're in the middle of these discussions, not just among development partners, but also equally so with academia. It's about also bringing in the private sector into these discussions. And I think there's more to be said in terms of what can be done for all of us collectively to be moving forward on this agenda beyond just the World Bank and the IMF. Thank you.
Great. And Go ahead, Matthew.
Yeah, I might take the last question a little bit. I might start a little differently, though.
So the last question is who to engage?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And first, I do think we should start with who should be the ones engaging in the first place. And this is where I want to talk to all of my fellow youth in the room. We are a force of nature, okay? And it has been proven by the fact that you are all here today and represented. I run a program at Georgetown that's actually launching in a month. It's called Global Health Governance as Public Service. And we are a funded delegation, unofficial youth delegation. I've been training 5 undergraduate students who are going to be attending the World Health Assembly in Geneva this May. And what they're working on is actually a joint policy brief of recommendations to do exactly what you're asking about. So to get to kind of the second aspect of that, I think that youth are so capable to speak to the true leaders and change makers, which makes us change makers within our own right. And looking at who to engage, I don't think there's necessarily someone we shouldn't be engaging in some ways, but I think one of the best places to start are these international fora, are these places where we're bringing together people from so many different entities, from so many different realms, under a common goal and a common consensus. So another big piece of advice to my fellow youth out there, network, network, network. When you cannot go up, go sideways, and do not let anyone tell you that you cannot accomplish something, because you are proven by the fact that you are in this room that you are able of accomplishing anything.
Matthew, because I'm not young, I just want to second your motion and say that it really is the power of youth. Youth don't have so much agendas, they don't have agenda baggage, So as nurses and doctors are very trusted messengers on the climate crisis, youth are trusted because they're not corrupted yet. So we hope, Anyway, so this person in the back, and then Liz, you're second.
Pinaki Panigrahi, Georgetown University. Extremely reassuring, comforting session. I wasn't expecting this to be so nice. I have a question for Tamer, for the World Bank, an extremely naive question. Several examples that you gave, different countries coming for different things, those are all uniquely wonderful questions and solutions. They are asked you looking for solutions. Did they come to you or you went to them? Because normally the World Bank people think that, you ask countries to devaluate their currency and give them loans, and so that's why not many people are coming to the World Bank these days. So what role exactly are you playing? And seems to be a wonderful and very powerful role. What's going on that front?
Great. So remember that. Okay, Liz and Gina, and then we'll take our 4th question, and then we'll wrap it up after these 4. Go ahead, Liz.
Sure, and this is a slightly different question. Liz Grant from University of Edinburgh. And you said in all the presentations, people are at the centre, and you also said people are suffering at the centre, and that's key. So my question is, we need a paradigm shift, because at the minute, people's care is almost, I'm not talking the health service care, but just the care of people is almost accidental, unintentional, incidental with our climate mitigation and adaptation strategies. How would we design systems compassionately so that we were alleviating suffering as well as enabling human and planetary flourishing?
Thank you. Gina?
Thank you so much. My name is Gina Cosentino. I'm a Senior Social Development Specialist at the World Bank in the Africa region. Tamer's my colleague. So I work in Africa, but I've also worked in previous roles around the world. So I just want to make a plug for some of the things that we talked about and some of the themes. So one of the presentations talked about sustainability. And as a social development specialist, and thank you, Catherine, for highlighting the social aspects of this, is that sustainability fundamentally has a social angle. So it's not only the environmental aspect, but it's social. It doesn't make sense if environmental interventions or One Health interventions don't meet the needs of people. And by that, it's not just generically having the assessments to understand the publics that we're dealing with. And some of those communities rely very much fundamentally on animals, on nature. And so this also ties into the issues of natural capital and valuing nature, and not just thinking about an economically deterministic value, that it's not just how much money the tree, keeping a tree in the air, in the ground means to a community, right? There's a spiritual well-being, it's tied to ceremony, it's tied to just the very important aspects of tied to human health, right? So it's not just an economic number. We also talked about some indices, and one of the indices that we didn't mention is the relationship between conflict and climate. And so we can't have healthy economies and healthy outcomes for lives and well-being if we're dealing with climate change where people are fighting over scarce natural resources, lack of water, lack of food, animals can't find water, etc. And some of the places, it's no coincidence that some of the places where we're having the most protracted areas of instability are areas under most climate stress. So I think this is one of the things that the bank has been working on in FCV, Fragile Conflict Violence States, to address that intersection between human health, animal health, peace and stability, and then investments in local economies. And then just to wrap it up, the last thing is that, and this speaks to the question regarding how the bank structures, its programming, I know Tamara will probably speak to this as well, is that we do have, when countries do come to us, there's partnerships that are developed through systematic country diagnostics, and these are the analysis that are done on every sector, and that is done with the countries themselves through, also academics kind of filter that in. And then over time, what's developed is a country partnership framework, and that's where the bank determines where the value add and the investment can happen, and then different programs get developed around that through bank teams and, of course, the country. So it's not just bank comes in and says, this is what you need to do. It's come through with analysis and with partnerships with governments. I just wanted to make that plug. But thank you so much.
Well, Gina, such valuable insights. That's really, it's more than just the money, social, spiritual, conflict, or we don't get anywhere without taking those in mind. Thank you. Yes, in the back.
Thank you guys so much and for taking my question. I'm Lauren. I'm an infectious disease doctor at Yale. One of the things that I find challenging about climate change and health, and then also planetary health, is it seems like there's this really never-ending connection of all these different problems that really infiltrate, it seems like, every aspect of life in this way that you don't really know where all these connections and interactions stop. Do you, as experts in the field, have any practical advice for us, the people in the room, of how we can focus these efforts or focus on these things for either our personal or professional or organizational roles?
I think I can answer that one, but I'll save that for last. Thank you. Okay, World Bank and then paradigm shifts. Tamara, do you want to?
So I guess, Gina, thank you so much. You've already helped me out with that question. But I want to start off, perhaps, to respond to the gentleman by saying that I'm a medical doctor by training. And I guess one of the things that happens when you're in medicine, sometimes you come in and you think you know it all, okay? And you get into the real world also as a public health professional, and you think you're the expert because you studied here or you studied there, or you know it all. You're part of the World Bank. You know it all. So you get somehow cocooned in being in this spot where you are dictating what needs to happen. And I think I've learned it on early in my career that we actually don't know it all. And in most cases, many of the solutions actually lie with those that we work with and those that we serve. So as Gina said, I think that the starting point with that understanding in mind is that whatever diagnostics we're doing, those are done in conjunction with governments. So this is the starting point. This is about ensuring that we understand the context and we bring in our country client, representatives in that space. This is point one. Point two, we need to make sure, we've heard today, for example, a lot of different terminologies. Global health, One Health, planetary health, what Matthew was talking about, and then everybody else was referring to. I think we need to ensure that we're also speaking the same language. So in most cases, it's about ensuring that there is some common understanding, if you will, of the topics. Because some cases you don't know what you don't know. And this happens on both sides, not just on our side, but equally so on the country, side. So they may not know that we want to be able to invest into energy efficiency. Let's just be clear about that. But the way they get to know about it is by attending forums like this, by being involved in these discussions, listening to other country examples. So one of the other things that we do is we bring, again, global knowledge closer to those countries through things like the Joint Learning Network that the bank has established. This is where we bring low-income countries, middle-income countries, to have more of a dialogue across the spectrum between the global south.
So,
thank you.
Thank you, Tamara. So I just got the pull from AV that we have to wrap up. So we have one-line answers, only a single-line answer. Who wants to talk about compassion and paradigm shifts? One sentence.
Try to reach people where they are, and there's an example from today where a ranger was actually responding to a chimp attack and went to the hospital to comfort the family, changing the perceptions of really being there, through a conservation lens. So I think more like that. Thank you, Gina.
Okay, and I'll answer the last question with a one-liner, which is that, every crisis presents an opportunity, and the climate crisis, I view, is the greatest public health opportunity of our lifetime. When you think about what a low-carbon economy with clean air, sustainable food, less meat in the diet, and alternative transportation, more walking, biking, cities designed for people instead of for cars, that's the message that we should be giving with the climate issue, not just the doom and gloom. So with that, help me thank the panelists.